Good evening, brothers and sisters in the Dhamma. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. I also wish to thank Brother Lai and Sister Jennifer for inviting me this evening, especially to share something from Bhante Punnaji. So I've decided to share one of the most important lessons that Bhante has been teaching us, that it is our emotions that keep disturbing us and causing so much trouble in our lives. So the important thing we need to learn is to learn how to tame this emotional mind of ours. So the topic is Taming Emotional Mind. Bhante always likes to ask this simple little question, who are we? And of course, most of us, when we try to answer this question, we say, oh, I am so-and-so, or I do this, or I do that, or I am doing this, or this is my job, or my occupation, my name. But in reality, we have to look at it from a very selfless perspective, and that is, Bhante always says that we are just organisms in an environment. We are striving to survive in this complicated environment of ours, and that is samsara. And basically there are two things happening inside this body of ours. First, there is this metabolism, the process of metabolism that keeps us alive, and then there is this process of consciousness arising from the 5 sense organs as well as the mind. So it's experiencing the environment through 5 physiological senses plus the mind. So we're able to see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. And this is the process of the pancha kanda, what is commonly called the 5 aggregates. This enables us to experience the environment from whatever we see, hear, smell, taste, or touch. And then the mind will process it. So this is really who we are. We are just organisms in an environment. But of course, in this body, there's a lot of activity going on. And the important topic we're really going to talk about is touching on this question about the mind. What is the mind? Before we get there, we need to quickly take a look at the body. There is a correlation between the body and the mind. In our sensual world, kama loka, if we don't have a body, we cannot sense the environment. If we don't have a body, we don't have consciousness. So consciousness depends on having this body that can actually interact in the environment, organism in an environment. So in this body, the most important part of the body that actually helps us is our central nervous system. And this central nervous system is made of 2 parts. That is the brain and the spinal cord. You know, we can do without a lot of parts of the body. People without hands, you've seen people without hands surviving, without legs surviving. Sometimes without a big part of their body, they are still surviving. But without the brain and the spinal cord, we cannot survive. So what the spinal cord does is that it is connected to the peripheral nervous system where our sense organs are connected, and it brings in all the sense information through the spinal cord into the brain, and the brain processes it. And inside the brain that is processing it, it is made of 3 main layers. The innermost is the brain stem. This is the oldest, most primitive part of the brain. And then later on evolved the limbic system, which is the emotional brain. All these are evolved over millions of years. Originally, organisms only had brain stem. And then organisms began to evolve with limbic system that enabled them to become emotional, reacting to the environment. And finally, some organisms begin to evolve with this cerebral cortex, enabling them to think. So there are animals that are able to do some thinking. And humans, of course, have the highest and most powerful thinking capacity. And that's because of the cerebral cortex, the outermost layer of the brain. Now, there are 2 things we need to know about the brain. One part of the brain causes all the suffering in the world. The other part of the brain can help us find happiness, and live a happy life. So let's take a look at the part of the brain that brings all the suffering in the world. And that is found deep inside the emotional brain, called the amygdala. There's a small little tissue deep inside the limbic system, the emotional command center of the brain. This is called the amygdala. What the amygdala does is that whenever our sense organs sense something, the information is passed through the amygdala, and the amygdala senses looking for potential threats. The purpose of the amygdala is to sense for threats. Threats means anything that can harm the organism. And as soon as it detects something that may represent some kind of a threat, it triggers a chain reaction. And the whole purpose of this is to protect us from harm. Now, some of the information that it interprets as harmful to the organism are things like a fast approaching object, something coming towards you very quickly, or very loud sounds, because that is all these reactions and sensing are evolved over millions of years. Very loud sound is evolved from ancient times when man was walking through the jungle and coming across saber-toothed tiger, hearing the sound of the saber-toothed tiger. So all these are evolved, right? And bright light, high temperature, heat, extreme cold, all these are sensed as threats. The moment the amygdala senses any of these kind of things happening around us, it triggers a chain reaction, and that chain reaction causes the body to go into this fight or flight reaction. Right? And it is automatic. There's no time for you to think. And it causes your body to react very quickly. I'll give you a very simple example. If I were to throw a basketball at you very quickly without any notice, what would you do? Will you see the basketball coming towards you and say, oh, it's a basketball approaching towards me. It looks like it's going to hit my head. Now, if I don't catch it or duck, then it will hit my head and it's painful. So maybe it's time for me to catch the ball or duck. Do you have time to think like that? No, it's the amygdala. The amygdala senses this fast approaching object, causes a chain reaction in the body, and the body moved out of the way. The same thing, you could be walking down the street and suddenly a truck out of control coming towards you. Do you have time to think that, oh, this truck is going to run over me, it'll kill me if I don't jump out of the way, maybe it's time to jump out of the way? You don't have time to think like that, because by the time you think like that, the truck would have run over you. So the amygdala actually causes all these reactions to protect you from harm. That's why the amygdala is like a bodyguard. It has evolved over millions of years to do that, but unfortunately, there is also another aspect of the amygdala. It can be falsely triggered, falsely aroused. So when it is aroused, it produces a chain reaction of emotions. But whether it is aroused genuinely because of threats that it has sensed, or because of unnecessary conditions creating a false alarm. What are some of the conditions that can create a false alarm? Simply, if you're sitting there reading newspaper, deeply engrossed in reading the newspaper or reading a Dhamma book, and somebody comes up from behind you and touch you on the shoulder, what happens? Your whole body gets spooked, and that is all the action of the amygdala. Now, this spooking reaction is happening in us all the time. We don't realize it. It doesn't have to be somebody touching you suddenly. It can be even a single word. I say the word asam laksa. Some of you, are you not feeling a little bit of sourness in your mouth? Yeah, amygdala did that. I didn't do that. I just said asam laksa. Your amygdala caused that. So the amygdala created this stress reaction inside your body. So there's so many words we hear during the day that is causing that. So almost continuously throughout the day, this is causing the arousal of stress reaction in the body. Stress reaction in the body leads to emotional reaction. Right? It's basically a chain reaction altogether. So the amygdala can be a terrorist in your brain. So the amygdala can be the thing that is causing you a lot of suffering. Now, when the amygdala is aroused, the first thing it does is create a chain reaction called fight or flight reaction, sending signals to the glands, especially the adrenal gland, causing releasing of two very powerful stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline. And they cause a lot of chain reaction happening in the body. For instance, it causes your heart rate to go up, your heart rate to beat faster, it causes your blood pressure to rise, it causes blood circulation to increase, it causes your body temperature to rise, causes your muscles to be all tensed up, and it even suspends your digestive system and so on. So it actually creates quite a bit of a chain reaction. And not only that, it also causes the hair to stand on end, and it causes your pupils to dilate so that you try to see more clearly. What is it, some kind of a threat or what? And it also causes facial expression to distort. So all this chain reaction is quite instantly produced. The moment you see, hear, smell, taste, or touch something that might arouse the amygdala, straight away your whole body will react. So you can see here an example of all this reaction. Hair standing on end, pupils dilating, facial expression distorting, muscles all tensed up. Now, all these are the result of hormones being released, causing various organs to react, and it's very harmful. These hormones, this stress hormone, is very harmful. If you allow this condition to happen very regularly, very frequently, it can actually dry up your skin. And when you get old, you look like that for the ladies. Yeah? And this is classic example of a person who has lived a very, very emotional and stressful life. Usually someone who had to struggle for a living throughout her entire life. Now, guys, don't think this only happens to ladies. It also happens to men, even the best of the men. Right? Famous movie actors, you can see them. So it's happening to everybody. There is no exception. Except that I don't get hair standing on end anymore. Well, I solved one problem. So this is really the chain reaction in the body causing all kinds of reaction which can lead to a lot of health damage to your health, right? For example, it also causes your blood sugar to increase. So if you get stressed and blood sugar is released frequently, what happens? You become diabetic. And if you have pupils dilating too frequently, what happens? When you get old, your eyesight weakens. When you have a facial expression that is distorted too frequently, what happens? You get all kinds of railway tracks on your face, right? And if you have blood pressure rising too frequently, what happens? You end up hypertensive, right? So there's a whole lot of very negative effect on your health if you allow this stress reaction to happen. Now, sometimes you cannot prevent it from arising. Like I said, asam laksa, and you start to feel it. I can say wasabi, and some of you may feel a tingle in your nose. Right? I can even go worse than that, but I won't do that. Scratching the blackboard, that's one of my favorite. But and anyway, it's happening to us day in and day out, and that leads to emotional reaction. Because once the body gets tense like that, it disturbs the mind. And when the mind is disturbed, that is the arising of emotions. So this is really a chain reaction. But sometimes it can be the other way around. You experience something that may be emotional and your whole body become all stressed up. So it's really a chain reaction that is causing a lot of problems in your body and your health. There is another part of the brain that can help you overcome that. And the other part of the brain that can help you is your cerebral cortex, your thinking brain, or some call it the learning brain. It is made of 4 lobes. There is the parietal lobe, occipital lobe, the temporal lobe, and finally the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe is the part of the brain that does most of the thinking. And in this frontal lobe, it is performing those functions listed there. But the most important functions are the ones in the bottom 2 lines. And that is really the functions of that little part of your brain underneath the frontal lobe that is called the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that is responsible for those last 2 functions, 2 lines of functions there. And they can be helping you to bring happiness in your life. Because they are basically functions like decision-making, goal-setting, planning, judgment, reasoning, and rationalizing. Right? Decision-making. Now, a lot of people have the wrong idea about happiness. They think that happiness is dependent on conditions. A lot of people do. They think like that. They think, I will only be happy if I get a pay rise. I will only be happy if I get married. I will only be happy if I have children. And as you grow old, I will only be happy if I have more grandchildren. A lot of people think like that. I will only be happy if certain conditions are met. And then if those conditions are not met, what happens? Many of us then begin to think, oh, why is it happening to me? Why me? But they don't realize the little secret about happiness is happiness begins with a decision. That's all it is. Decide to be happy. Once you decide to be happy, you will start thinking about some of the things you can do, some of the things you can accomplish. Right? And that is goal setting. And when you start to think like that, you start to plan. What can you do? How can you do these things to help yourself? Because you already decided to be happy, now you want to do something to help it along. And finally, you can decide what is right or wrong, that is judgment, and reason out what is cause and effect, and then plan out and allocate your resources, and that's rationalizing. So these very important brain functions can help you to become happy if you just make that decision, I want to be happy. I'm very happy that many of us have made a decision along those lines, because otherwise you won't be coming here attending Dhamma talk, you won't be coming here to experience the Buddha Sasana. All because you have already made a decision that Buddha Dhamma is something of interest to me. I want to spend some time studying it, practicing it, sharing it. That is a decision already, and by making that decision, it brings you a lot of happiness. Right? So this is really a little secret about happiness. It is a decision. It's all depending on your thinking. If you think that you're not going to be happy, then some people do that. They wake up in the morning, and then they have a running cold, and then have a sore throat, and then they start to cough, and then they think, oh, the rest of my day is going to be spoiled. Now, the moment you think like that, what happens? You start to do things to make yourself feel terrible, because you start to look at everything from a very pessimistic point of view. So, the whole thing is, if you have a running nose or a sore throat, that doesn't mean that by thinking you can get rid of it, but don't think of it as though, oh, my whole day is going to be spoiled. Just focus on, what do I need now? Take some Panadol. And if that can help you, good. If you can't, just focus your mind on what you're going to do for the rest of the day. And as your nose is running, go and see a doctor if you have to. So all these are decision making. At the end of the day, the decisions you make lead to your happiness or lead to your sorrow. You decide. What do you want? Right? So it's all about decision, and it's all happening in the mind. The mind processes all this. So if we were to take a look at the mind, it is really an activity. So I'm going to share with you Bhante Punnaji's explanation of a lot of these things, because he has spent a lot of time studying this, and he has researched it, and as a youngster, he started already, at the age of 6, he told me that at the age of 6, when he met Venerable Narada, the one who wrote quite a number of very famous books, he was so inspired by Venerable Narada at that time in Colombo that he wanted to become a monk at the age of 6. But his parents were very wealthy people, and they didn't want him to be a monk, because they wanted him to be the heir to their family fortune. So they did not allow him to be a monk. So he actually practiced meditation along the way. And of course, he went to school and became a medical doctor. But as a young man, he already went very deep into meditation. And from the things that he was telling me, many of these, he didn't, of course, say it publicly, but from the things, from a lot of time that I spent with him, from the things that he was telling me, he had attained a very high level of meditative progress, even as a young man. So that when he was teaching us some of the very high-level stuff about meditation, it appeared very clearly that it all came out naturally. He wasn't just talking about it from reading books. He was talking about it from experience, talking about reaching the fourth jhana and even beyond the four jhanas. So now I'm going to share with you some of the things that he had been talking about and teaching us about the brain and the mind. He says that we have two minds, which are really two activities of the body. It's very important because without the body, there is no mind. And the first is this emotional mind, which is unconscious. And he calls it chitta. And then there is this rational conscious mind, which is mano. These are the words the Buddha used, mano and chitta. These are the words the Buddha used to describe the mind. So he differentiated it. And this is one of the key things that the Bhante taught us. He was able to make it very clear, differentiating, discerning what is chitta, what is mano. And by doing so, we gain a much better understanding of what the Buddha was trying to teach us. I'm going to illustrate to you in a moment where the Buddha used these two words in different places to mean different things. And if we don't look at it from that very discerning perspective, we will not be able to understand it very well. So it is important to realize that Bhante kept talking about this emotional mind called chitta and this thinking rational mind called mano. So the emotional mind developed first because it is in mainly activities of the limbic system, which is something that evolved first, long before the cerebral cortex, the outermost layer. So the emotional mind developed first during evolution, and the rational mind developed later. Although, of course, it is also important to remember that what we call mind is only an activity of the body. Right? We do not have an entity separate from the body called mind. Mind is not an entity. Entity means it's something you can touch and feel, something you can hold on to. Mind, you can't do that. It's an activity. It's a process that is ongoing. The only thing you can talk about the mind is to experience it. So it's really experiencing. Right? Mind is about experiencing. Mind is not about existential, existing. And this is another very important thing that Bhante has been reminding us. If you really want to understand Bhante's teaching, in fact, if you really want to understand the Buddha's teaching, always carry an experiential mindset. When you read something in the sutra, think of it from experiential point of view. It's an experience. Don't think of it from existential point of view. So this is one of the first things that Bhante mentioned about mind. That we have two minds. One is called chitta, which is the emotion, and the other one is called mano, which is the rational thinking. And then the Bhante went on to say that what we call mind is only an activity of the body. So the only way you can know there is an activity is experiencing it. Consciousness is an experience. The mind is an experience. All are experiences. So if you think of it from experiential perspective, you will get a better understanding. So we do not have an entity that is separate from the body that is called mind. Mind is not something separate from the body. If there is no body, then there is no mind. This also leads us to a very interesting question. Many people say, how about this thing about out-of-body experience? I personally don't believe in it. Right? Your consciousness does not leave your body. But a lot of people try to claim it does. Nobody can prove it yet. It has not been proven. There are a lot of people making all kinds of speculative proof, making it sound so convincing, but nothing is proven yet. So consciousness doesn't leave the body as far as we can understand up to this point now. Okay. Then Bhante went on to explain further that the Buddha has repeatedly pointed out that there is no entity other than the body to be referred to as mind or soul. Right? So you cannot refer to this mind as a soul. Consciousness is not a soul. That's why we don't believe in this thing called soul. Soul is a word that is used to describe a package of consciousness which can leave the body and enter another body, because that's transmigration or even the word reincarnation. Now we have to be very careful. A lot of Buddhists use the wrong word to describe rebirth. They call it reincarnation. Reincarnation is the wrong word. Reincarnation simply means a soul has discarnated from the body and re-entered another body That is called reincarnation. We do not have reincarnation. Buddhists do not subscribe to reincarnation. It is rebirth. Rebirth meaning this consciousness, when the body dies, the consciousness is extinguished. And at the same time, it is reignited at somewhere else. It could be in the womb or something like that. There is no such thing as this consciousness leaving the body, traveling to the womb and entering the womb. It doesn't happen like that. So we have to think of it as rebirth, not reincarnation. So the word reincarnation refers to a soul, a package of consciousness that is considered as a kind of entity, leaving the body, entering another body. And that is not the Buddhist belief. Okay, so the Tanha Sankhaya Sutra in the Majjhima Nikaya explains this fact very clearly. And the Buddha used 3 words to refer to 3 different activities of the nervous system, which collectively is called mind. Now, unfortunately, a lot of translators, whenever they see any of these 3 words, they just translate it as mind. They don't differentiate it. Without differentiating it, it is hard to really understand and grasp what the Buddha was trying to teach us. So we'll come to that in a moment. So these 3 words, what are they? Right? So now I will explain it in a little bit more detail about these 3 words. First, vijnana. Vijnana refers to the process of perception whereby you become aware of an object because your sense organs have been stimulated. When light enters the eye, it triggers a chain reaction sending signals to the brain, and then the brain becomes aware of what was seen by the eye. That process, that whole process is actually the process of Panchakanda. And at the end of the process of Panchakanda, vijnana arises. Vijnana refers to this perception. You have now perceived an object out there through your sense organs, and that is vijnana. And that is one of the activity of the mind. That is actually the fundamental activity of the mind. So when this arises, vijnana arises in the form of a mental image. When this mental image arises, there is another aspect of the mind that is processing it, and that is the mano. Mano is commonly called the cognitive process. And this is the part of the mind that is responsible for cognition and conception. Cognition refers to the awareness of object. Conception refers to creating stories or concept about the object that you became aware of. So, mano really is this cognitive process whereby it gives a interpretation or identification of what was perceived by the sense organ. So it's basically the categorized identification of the perception by giving it a name, a label, nama. And this is referring to a mental image arising, rupa. Now here it's very important to realize that Bhante Punnaji has always made it very clear, the word rupa, often translated as object, matter, materiality. These are not accurate translations as far as what Bhante Punnaji has been teaching us. Rupa simply refers to a mental image of what was perceived through the sense organs. But unfortunately, people think in existential terms. And when you think in existential terms, then this rupa refers to an object. Now, rupa is sometimes referred to as form. Form is okay because mental image has form. Right? So if you refer to form in terms of a mental image, yes, rupa is form. But some people refer to rupa as form in terms of physical form. It has dimensions. How many inches wide, how many inches long, how tall, how big, how small, how heavy. And that is form. And that is not correct, because that is talking about something that physically exists. We are only talking about experiential activities in the mind. And rupa refers to this mental image arising as a result of your sense organs being stimulated, vijnana arising, giving rise to this mental image. And then when this mental image arises, the mano begins to identify what it is by giving it a name. So for example, seeing this, then the mother will call it, oh, mineral water, a bottle of mineral water. Now, why do we know it's a bottle of mineral water? Because we have seen hundreds of mineral water before. So when the image of this object arises in the mind, it reminds us resembling the hundreds of different types of mineral water we've ever seen before. And therefore we categorize it and call it mineral water. That's how we recognize things, recognizing. So this is cognitive function. This is the cognition. Gives rise to identifying what it is. But associated with this identification, we begin to create stories about it. We begin to think about a history or a future or imagination about it, and that is conception. I'll talk about that later. Conception simply refers to creating concepts, creating views, creating stories about what was cognized. Right? First, there was just cognition, and then conception arises. And this is the work of Mano. All this has to do with an interaction with the memory. At the same time, whenever the mind is aware of an object, then chitta is reacting to it, because chitta is this affective process. In a nutshell, you could say chitta refers to the emotional process. But the word emotion actually means a lot of things. So to keep it simple, we use a very common psychological term called affective process. It leads to mood and temperament. So when we become aware of an object, we start to feel whether it is pleasant or unpleasant. And that leads us to have a mood about it. If it is something pleasant, you have a good mood. If it is something unpleasant, your mood is not so nice. So your mood arises as a result of whether something is pleasant or unpleasant. So chitta is that part of the mind that reacts to something that seems to be pleasant or unpleasant. And this reaction is called tanha. Tanha is commonly translated as craving, but the more accurate meaning of tanha is emotional reaction. Because craving, if you think about craving, what if it is something you hated? Then how can you say it's craving? Do you crave for something you hate? Of course not. So emotional reaction is a more precise explanation of the word tanha. If it is something you hate, you react to it emotionally. You don't like it, you hate it, you get angry with it. So that is tanha, emotional reaction to that feeling. When you experience something, you feel something about it. Oh, is it pleasant or not pleasant? So there is a feeling about everything you experience, and that reaction to it is tanha. And this is arising from the cognition, right, leading to mood and temperament. Temperament means your tendency to want to do something. Temperament can lead you to take action, your urge to do something. Right? So all these are leading to deep, strong emotional states. So everything we see, hear, smell, taste, or touch, like it or not, arouses the emotion in one way or another. Right? And usually it also triggers the stress chain reaction. At the same time, when we have this reaction, we begin to personalize it and say, oh, I like it. When it is something that you feel pleasant about, you never say, this object is pleasant. You feel, you start to think, I like this, This is nice to me. Now, not everything has the same reaction to everybody. If I show you this mouse, some of you will look at it and say, oh, it's a nice blue mouse. I like blue. Nice mouse. But some of you who don't like the color blue, you look at it, yucks, I don't like this color blue. This mouse looks so ugly. You see, to different people, you have different reaction. Simple example, many of us like durian. So when we smell durian, oh, nice smell. What about the Masale who comes from Europe, come from Switzerland? The moment he smells durian, he gets very upset because he says, this is a foul smell. Then he brings out a bag of cheese. His cheese is something that he has been fermenting for a long time. He opens it up, and then you smell that foul smell cheese. And what do you feel about it? You say, yucks. But he says, woo, lovely smell. You see? Different things can mean different, can have different feelings to different people, right? So there is no such thing as an absolute thing, whether this is absolutely nice or not nice. You look at a lady with a super long neck with all this ring around it coming from Myanmar, Yeah, you say, oh, that doesn't look nice. You know, you like to see ladies with necks that are reasonable and not this super long one with the rings all over there. But in Myanmar, a lady who has that is considered extremely beautiful. You see? So we have to be aware of that. Now, these three aspects of the mind, it's very important to understand them, because if you understand what they are and how they work, you begin to really understand yourself a lot better. The first one, vijnana. This is really the perception, perceiving objects. So this is the aspect of the mind that is perceiving objects from the environment because of the stimulation of the sense organs. And then mano is the part of the mind that is cognizing, meaning it is giving meaning to what was perceived. And not only that, mano also creates a story behind it. Conceiving, conception, creating concepts, views and concepts arising. And every time you see, hear, smell, taste, or touch something, your mind cannot help but start creating concepts and views about it. Opinions, judgment, all these are arising automatically. Right? We have to be aware of it and then learn how to deal with it. Otherwise, it'll lead to a lot of suffering. And finally, the chitta is the part of the mind where it is experiencing something to be pleasant or unpleasant, reacting to it, having this urge to want to do something about it, reacting to it, and at the same time, personalizing that reaction. Right? I like this, I don't like that. Every time you react to something, the first word in your mind is an I, me, or mine. That's what it is. So you're personalizing all your reaction. So this is what the mind does. And all this is happening constantly throughout the day, 24/7, right? And it's going on even when we are asleep. All this is still happening. You may not be seeing something, but your memory arises, and then you begin to react to it, whether it is a pleasant memory or an unpleasant memory. Right? So now let's take a look at what Bhante has to say about these three aspects of the mind. But the part that really brings us a lot of suffering, you should know, is chitta. And this is the part of the mind that leads to mood and temperament. So let's listen to what Bhante has to say about this chitta. Chitta is the part of the mind that really controls a lot of our reaction in life.
So in the human being, the thinking part is called mano, whereas the emotional part is called chitta. But the Buddha pointed out was, what has to be done is not to obey the chitta. What is happening today is that the mano part, the thinking part, is doing what the chitta wants. You see, chitta is dominating the mind. And the mano is just catering to the chitta. There is a verse where the Buddha says, Chittena niyati loko, chittena parikassati, chittassa eka dhammassa, sabbeva vasamang bagu. What that means is, chitta is dominating the world. Chittena niyati loko. Loka is the world. Chittena niyati loko. Chittena parikassati. Chitta is disturbing everything. Chittassa eka dhammassa. Chitta is that one thing. Sabbeva vasabang vagu. That everyone is spellbound by chitta. Everyone is dominated by chitta. Like being spellbound. So therefore, the only thing is to learn how to gain control over the chitta, the emotional part.
So Bhante pointed out the important thing is to learn how to gain control over the emotional mind, chitta. Right? And here he mentioned chitta dominates. The thinking part is mano, emotional part is chitta. And mano is doing what the chitta wants. Normally that's what it is. When the chitta begins to react, the mano basically follows along with what the chitta does. And chitta is dominating the mind. And we are all spellbound, dominated by chitta. The solution is to learn how to gain control over chitta, the emotional mind. Now, Bhante was talking about this particular verse in the sutra, the Chitta Sutra, in Samyutta Nikaya, where it says, emotions dominate the world. Emotions create distress. Distress refers to mental suffering. Stress is physical suffering. Stress is something that causes the changes in the body. We looked at it just now, a moment ago. The physical changes in the body, that is stress. Distress is, these changes produce sensations in the body which disturbs the mind. And when it disturbs the mind becomes very distressed, disturbed. So distress is mental suffering. So emotions dominate the world, emotions create distress. Emotion is that one thing to which all are spellbound. Now, very important here, pay attention to the fact that the Buddha was using the word chitta. And many people who translate this verse do not translate it as emotions. They translate it as mind. If I were to read this and say, mind dominates the world, mind creates distress, mind is that one thing to which all are spellbound, does it make much sense to you? How can mind create distress? Right? Mind is experiencing distress. But if I were to say emotions create distress, it makes a whole lot more sense. This is why it's so important, many of us who think when we read the sutra and we listen to the Dhamma, we think about it and we realize Bhante Punnaji's explanation was very, very precise. If you were a thinker, when you study the Buddha Dhamma and you start to explore the thinking, you will realize how precise Bhante Punnaji's translations and explanations are. So here is one example where chitta is really talking about emotions, and Buddha here was referring to emotions, and it makes a lot more sense now if you think of this verse in terms of emotions and not just mind in general. Now, a lot of things are happening around us. We call this the inevitable realities of modern life, right? For instance, environmental activities, they're stimulating, constantly bombarding our senses. So many things going on. The phone is ringing, lights are shining, and aircon is too cold, and all that affecting us. So they're putting pressure on our attention system to respond. Circumstances keep changing, unpredictable, and that leads to a lot of uncertainties and insecurities. And people around us, our own siblings or children or parents or whoever, make demands upon us and having expectations on us, putting pressure on us to respond. And at the same time, we have to do things according to deadlines. So deadlines and schedules drain away our energy resources. And of course, a lot of things around us are causing trouble to us. Obstacles, problems, and difficulties arise unexpectedly to hinder our planned activities. Nothing is going to going according to plan. This is really happening to us day in, day out. Inevitable realities of modern life. And they create a perception of threat. That's why the amygdala easily gets aroused. When somebody puts a demand on you, the amygdala is aroused and causes a chain reaction. The bodily chain reaction is called stress. The mental, emotional chain reaction is called distress. People do not stress you. This is something a lot of people misunderstand. Oh, my boss giving me so much work, he is stressing me. Your boss never stressed you. Your boss gives you a lot of work, yes. The stress is something that arises from within you. It's the way you react to it, the way the brain is reacting to it, the way the amygdala is aroused, causing this chain reaction called stress. Stress is something that happens within you. And it is not something somebody does to you. What that person does to you is just simply putting pressure on you. It is the way you react to it. Now, if you were to see something happening, and if you were to treat it without reacting to it too much, like your boss giving you a lot of work, and you just take it easily in your own stride and say, no problem, more work, okay, no problem, I'll just stay back more and get more overtime, If you take it easily, you won't get stressed. But the moment you think, the boss gave me so much work, I cannot finish, I got to go and play golf after this, I got to go and play badminton, I got to go to the gym, where got time, to handle all this, and then you get stressed. Stress is happening from within you. Learn how to deal with it. So let's see what happens. This is really a vicious cycle of emotions. It's a vicious cycle, meaning when it happens, it goes into a chain reaction, and that chain reaction can be very damaging to your mental health. Things are happening around the environment. And then the mind begins to interpret, what's going on? And you start to become aware of it. And if it is something that puts pressure on you, what happens? You begin to interpret it as a perception of threat. The moment you interpret something as a perception of threat, the amygdala is aroused, and the chain reaction happens, and then you begin to experience the arousal of emotion. Here, it is the beginning of emotion. Until about 150 years ago, a lot of scientists used to think, emotion is all in the mind. No. Then they started to realize emotion begins with changes in the body. The first thing that happens when emotions are aroused is your body changes. It's stress. Stress kick-starts this emotional reaction. So the body changes and you begin to feel bodily discomfort. And it is this bodily discomfort creating sensations in the body that disturbs the mind, and then the mind gets distressed. Distress comes after stress. Stress happens first, and then followed by distress. All this happening very quickly. And when you experience distress, your habitual reaction arises. And then you begin to experience various emotional states. And with that emotional state, you begin to want to do something and you begin to react. Your tanha comes out and you begin to react. And you begin to think about it in terms of, the past, was it like that? The boss didn't used to give me so much work. The boss is now giving me more and more work. What's he trying to do to me? He's trying to drive me crazy or what? So you begin to imagine a lot of things. So this is the vicious cycle of emotions. It begins with your interpretation of the circumstances. And if you were to interpret something to be a threat to you, it arouses your emotions, it causes body to change, and then it leads to distress, and then you fall into various emotional states, and you begin to react in a number of ways. So this first part is vijnana, right? Environmental activities, stimulating your sense organ, giving rise to the awareness of perceived objects. That is vijnana. This part of the mind is the mano. The mano begins to interpret it, right? Interpreting it by having mental image, rupa arising, giving names to it, labels to it. Don't think it's just straightforward seeing a bottle, you then imagine it's a bottle. This can actually, this seeing an object and then giving it a name can turn out to be something like that. If your boss has been giving you so much work, making you really angry and pissed off with him, every time you see his face, maybe some bad words arise in your mind. You want to call him by some really dirty names. Yeah? So you can imagine. So then you are beginning to give the nama to the rupa of your boss. Right? And that rupa may not necessarily be in the form of a visual image. It can, rupa actually generally refers to image. But images in your mind take on all the different forms. It can be a visual image. It can be an auditory image, a sound. Right? It can also be a smell image. And it can also be a touch image. Right? So the sound image is somebody mentioned the boss's name. Just hearing his name alone can drive you crazy. Right? And that happens. So this is the mano part of the mind. And then chitta arises. And with chitta comes comes dukkha. Your body change. And this is now you're beginning to feel some physical suffering. So dukkha arises there. And with that, distress arising. And that's when you begin to want to react to it, tanha. Your reaction, your emotional reaction. And when you react, you begin to personalize every reaction. And that is upadana. Personalizing. And some people call this clinging. Well, clinging, attachment, grasping, or personalizing. Personalizing is actually a more accurate word. You are really personalizing what's going on. And in fact, the word upadana precisely means personalizing, not so much clinging or grasping. Okay, just to let you know, the word upadana comes from two root words, upa, adana. Upa means within, inside, inwards. Apa is outwards. Upa is inwards. Adana. Adana comes from the word dana. What is dana? Dana is giving. Adana is the opposite of giving. What is adana? Taking. Right? Dana is giving, adana is taking. And that's why adina dana, right? Adina dana. Dana when somebody gives you something. Adina is then you're trying to take it, right? Adina dana. So adana is taking in. So upa adana means you are taking in inside you, personalizing, carrying the burden within you and say that I like this, I don't like that. This is a very natural animal instinct. Animals do that all the time. Right? This is a very natural animal instinct. Animals react. When they like something, they will react in one way. They don't like something, they will react in another way. So in every single one of us, there is a kind of animal instinct. And we have to be very careful. Right? So let's take a look at this conditioned instinctive animal nature in every single one of us. See, we are organisms that have evolved over millions of years, long before we evolved into Homo sapiens. We were some kind of creatures climbing on the tree. We were not really apes. We were ape-like creatures. Actually, we were more like sloth. You know what sloth? Those very slow moving? Yeah. It was these sloth-like creatures that came down to the ground and began to stand upright and eventually evolved into Homo sapiens, the Homo species. So in every single one of us, we have animal instincts. We have to be aware of it. So let's listen to what Bhante Punnaji has to say about this animal instinct.
The important thing to understand is that what the Buddha was trying to do was to bring the human being, which is really a mixture of animal and the human being. The emotions are the animal part of the human being. Now there is a special sloka that is very useful to understand. Sloka is a Sanskrit verse. Ahara nidra bhaya maitunancha samanya metad pasubih naranam dharmo hitesa vadiko viseso dharmena hinah pasubih samanah. This is a very interesting thing. when you see the translation. Ahara means taking food, feeding. Nidra means sleeping. Bhaya means fear. Maithuna means sexual activity. Taking food, sleeping, fear and sexual activity. These are things that human beings have in common with animals. That is what it says. This is what human beings have in common with animals. Then he says, Dharmo hi tesa bandiko viseso. What is special about the human being is dharma. What is the meaning of dharma? Dharma is the ability to think and reason out and be able to identify what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. That is the dharma. That ability is the ability of the brain, thinking brain, which is called mano. Dharmena hina pasubik samana. One who is low in that thinking part is like an animal. That's what that sloka says. So in other words, the important teaching of the Buddha is to bring the human being to grow above or transcend that animal nature and become fully human. That was the teaching of the Buddha, that we have to get rid of this animal nature. And it is this animal nature that the Buddha called lobha, dosa and moha. Three things. In translation is lust, hate and delusion. The delusion is the idea of self. So we have to get rid of the lust, the hate and the thought I am. That is the selfishness. We have to overcome this selfishness and then only we rise above the animal and become fully human.
Bhante was referring to this verse here, basically mentioning that taking food, sleeping, avoiding dangers, sexual activities, these acts are common between animals and humans. Now, every animal species tries to do that. They try to stay alive, try to find food, try to produce, reproduce, and avoid the dangers, avoid being killed by predators, right? And this is really what every single animal does, including human beings. But unfortunately, humans take this to the extreme. Instead of avoiding dangers, we eliminate the danger by killing our predators, killing anything that we think is a threat to us. Humans are the only species that actually kills not for food, sometimes for pleasure, sometimes even for no reason at all. You know, animals don't do that. Animals kill for food, right? So we are actually worse than animals in that sense, right? So the ability to think, this is what makes us different from animals. And if we are not able to think, if we don't use this thinking ability, we are just like animals. In fact, we are worse than animals in many things that we do in this life. Animals don't destroy this planet. Humans do. We are destroying this planet with the use of plastics, with the use of fossil fuels, burning up the environment, causing all kinds of changes to the weather and so on. So Bhante pointed out that the ultimate human being, the one who has reached the highest level, that is the Arahant, the one who has completely gotten rid of lust, hatred and delusion of self. That is the Arahant. So that's what Bhante was trying to tell us. That is what the Buddha has been trying to teach us. The original teachings of the Buddha is to teach us to get rid of lust, hatred, and delusion of self. If we don't do that, it will actually bring us a lot of suffering. When we experience something, the emotions arise, and we allow these emotions to take control, and we begin to imagine what's going to happen next, or what has been happening in the past, and we begin to connect memory, imagination, expectations all in together. It actually brings us a lot more suffering than what we are experiencing. And the Buddha calls this self-affliction of mental suffering. And there's one Dhammapada verse that explains this beautifully. Dhammapada verse number 42, it says, whatever harm one enemy may do to another, or one hater to another, it is one's own ill-directed emotions that inflict upon oneself a greater harm. And here, ill-directed emotions simply means that when something happens to you, and then you begin to imagine and you begin to create all kinds of stories and concepts in your mind and views, it actually makes you suffer more. If you experience something that is suffering or painful to you, if you learn to let it go, you don't suffer so much. It is thinking about it, pondering over it, and trying to analyze it, all this. If somebody came up to me and said to me, "Oh, Billy, you are so fat," if I heard those words and I just thought, "Oh, he just spoke those words," and I just let it go, do I feel hurt? No, I don't feel hurt. In fact, better still, when I hear someone say that, I think about it, "Oh, you are such a good friend. You're trying to remind me to be careful of my health. Well, thank you so much." It is the way we interpret what has been to us. But if he says, "Billy, you're so fat," and I start to think, "Wow, this person, he thinks I look fat. Wow, that means he thinks I look ugly. Ayo, like that one. I'm so angry with him. He want to hurt my feeling or what?" You see, the more I think about it, the more it hurts me, you see. It is allowing my imagination, my memory, my expectations running wild. And this is called mental proliferation. We are very good at doing that. Every time something happens to us, the imagination arises, the memory arises, expectation arises, and then the mind begins to go overboard, and that is mental proliferation. Beware, because mental proliferation can drive you crazy. Mental proliferation can drive you into depression. And that's what happened to people falling into depression. They fall into depression not because what happened to them. No. Your loving husband may pass away, or your loving wife pass away, or your loving mother pass away. You won't go into depression. It is your mind beginning to imagine what will happen next. Without your husband, without your wife, or without your mother, all these things are not going to be able to handle, and you don't know how to cope with yourself. And that person has been helping you along, now nobody to help you, and now you're feeling so pitiful, you're pitying yourself. It's all this mental proliferation that drives you into depression. Events in your life, traumatic events in your life, does not drive you into depression. It's the way you respond to them, the way your mind goes crazy thinking about it. Mental proliferation is what drives you into depression. And that is what can even lead to suicidal tendencies and all that. So beware that your memory and your imagination and your expectations are not necessarily your friend. Realize that. If you allow them to get out of control, they can hurt you over and over and over again. Remembering that this person keep calling me fat. Oh, I feel so ugly. It is really very depressing if your mind keeps running over it and over it. Now, there is a way out of all this when you are experiencing all kinds of emotions. And Bhante here pointed out what the Buddha was teaching, and it's called the middle way. When we experience something that is emotional, we either release that emotion in action, we call it expression, we express it, or we withhold it, we suppress it. Either way doesn't work. Either way is not good because it causes a lot of suffering. If you express your emotion, that emotional expression can lead to a lot of arguments, conflicts, and pain and suffering. If you withhold your emotion, it can cause you to bottle it up and make you feel really all bottled up inside and you're really about to explode, right? Either way, it brings you a lot of suffering. So both being unpleasant. The Buddha pointed out there is a middle way, a medial way actually, which is conscious relaxation of the body and calmness of the mind. Let's take a look at what the Buddha actually talked about in the middle way. This is called Majjhima Patipada. That is the middle way. And the Buddha warned us, there are two extremities to be avoided. The first is indulgence into sensual desires. If you know, that means you are really reacting to anything you experience. The other is to withhold and force yourself not to react. Self-torment, self-mortification. Now, the Buddha, when he was a prince, as Prince Siddhartha, he experienced both to the extreme. He was a prince living in great comfort and great luxury in the palace. He had 3 palaces, and he was surrounded by young people, young women, and he was enjoying all kinds of pleasures in life. And he was reacting to it. So he was really reacting to these sensual pleasures. So one part of experiencing emotion is to express it. That means we really let go and react towards it. The other, you know, when he abandoned princely life and renounced and started to practice asceticism, he forced himself not to eat, not to drink. He even tried not to breathe, and that was when he fainted and nearly died, right? And he knew that was also not good. So this was really what ascetics do. They suppress forceful effort to restrain the emotions so that you never react. Both of these are painful and harmful. And the Buddha said there is a middle way. Now, until Bhante Punnaji explained this to me, I always thought, oh, the middle way. And I think a lot of people think the same too. I come across a lot of people who think like that too. Oh, the middle way means a little bit of sensual pleasures and a little bit of withholding. That's the middle way. No, that's not the middle way. The Buddha's precise words are very clear. He says, without steering towards either extreme, there is a middle way. Now, what does it mean? Without steering towards either extreme. That means the Buddha said very clearly, you don't indulge in a little bit of it. Right? And then you withhold the rest of it. That is not the middle way. So the middle way, and Bhante explained it very thoroughly. Now, the middle way was not well explained in the sutta. The Buddha only said the middle way, and then he went on to talk about the 4 Noble Truths and the Eightfold Way. And of course, people then say the Eightfold Way is the middle way. Yeah, the Eightfold Way is the practice of the middle way. But what did it really mean, the middle way? And Bhante explained this. He says, it is conscious relaxation, it is introspective attention, and then it is mental equilibrium. Conscious relaxation means you intentionally, consciously relax. And then bring your attention inwards to observe what's going on inside. That is really the practice of satipatthana. And then you will then cultivate this peace of mind, mental equilibrium. And that is when you experience samadhi. So here, this is really what it is, right? Conscious relaxation and introspective attention and mental equilibrium. And this is, of course, taught in great detail by the Buddha in the Eightfold Way. So to practice the middle way thoroughly is then to practice the Eightfold Way. But to keep it simple, it simply means conscious relaxation, meaning when something arouses your emotions, instead of engaging in it, instead of withholding it, you just learn to relax and bring your attention inwards and see how it is affecting you. And this is commonly called mindfulness, satipatthana, right? So the middle way, conscious relaxation, what does it do? It simply means when something happens, do not react. Consciously release the tensions in the body and calm the mind. And this means you pause and you relax. So in other words, if something is happening, arousing your emotion, instead of reacting to it, pause, don't react, take a deep breath, just relax, conscious relaxation. And then bring your attention inwards and ask, how is it affecting me? So gently bring attention inwards, mindfully observe the bodily and the mental activities that's going on. What is it doing to my body? What is it doing to my mind? What kind of emotion is it arousing in me? Why am I feeling like that? What makes me feel this way? So if you begin to introspect, ask yourself all this, you begin to understand better and you can get over it easier. And then you begin to learn how to relax and calm your mind and compose your mind. It will lead you to a state of mental equilibrium, which means you learn how to still the mind. You learn how to free yourself from emotional arousals and excitements, and this helps you suppress the 5 hindrances. And when you're able to suppress the 5 hindrances, even on a temporary basis, then you are able to experience samadhi, right? A state of blissfulness. And there are 4 kinds of samadhi. One of them is really jhana. So when you meditate, if you are able to suppress your 5 hindrances during meditation, you will experience jhana. So this is really experiencing this stillness of mind, the blissfulness of the mind, mental equilibrium. So these are the important ways of understanding what really is the middle way. Now the first part, pause and relax and then introspect. This is really what I call the 3-step self-compassion. You are compassionate towards yourself. When something happens out there, arousing your emotion, what should you do? Number 1, pause. Do not react. So allow time for this emotional excitement and anxiety to calm down. And when it is adequately calmed down, your hormones begin to subside. Because your hormones are released immediately. The moment somebody even says the word asam laksa, your hormones are released already. Wasabi, more hormones being released. Kari laksa, even more hormones start to come out. Now you got to learn how to pause and relax and allow the hormones to subside. And to help you along, learn how to consciously relax by using your breathing. Take a deep breath, right? And this will help you relax the body and compose the mind. And when your body is adequately relaxed and your mind is adequately composed and calm, that is the time you can think about what you're going to do to respond to the problem. And this is purposefully focus on wholesome and beneficial response to the problem. And this is how you can tackle emotions, how you can tame your emotions, by pausing, relaxing, and then thinking how you can overcome it. So the pausing and relaxing are very, very important. So this old adage, somebody says, oh, when you're getting all excited, just take a deep breath. It works. When you're getting all excited, don't react. Take a deep breath. It works. So let's go back into this vicious cycle of emotions. What's going on? All these things are happening, arousing the emotions. Now your emotional states arise, and you get upset, and you begin to react, and you cling on to your reactions. This first part here, this is really your stress reaction. Your body starts to change, and that stress reaction leads to distress, mental suffering, and that mental suffering leads to all kinds of emotional reaction, your tanha and your upadana. Right? These are the causes of your suffering. What can you do about it? Well, when something arouses your emotions and your body is getting all tensed up, learn to pause, relax, and then think about it. Let's take a look at what Bhante has to say about this. How to control your emotions.
One message goes to the amygdala and the emotion is aroused, and the other message goes to the brain where the thinking goes on, and then you begin to change the way. And now they are talking about this, so it's very important to understand that the Buddha has gone even beyond this end. If we see the first verse in the Dhammapada, there in the first verse in the Dhammapada, what you get is Mano Pubbangama Dhamma, which is wrongly translated today. There, mano means the thinking part. I told you there are two things, the thinking part and the emotional part, which is called chitta. Mano pubbangama means the thinking part comes first, before the emotional part. So it is by changing the thinking part, which is what is called the cognitive part, that the affective can be controlled. So it is the thinking part that is able to control. And that is the real secret discovered in the modern world by the cognitive psychologists. They are using that in what is called cognitive psychotherapy. They are using that principle, but still they are not able to fully control the emotions because they don't know about meditation. But the Buddha used this method.
So the Buddha actually taught about how we can learn how to overcome emotions by simply applying our thinking. And the first verse of the Dhammapada explained it. Now here, what Bhante was saying just now a moment ago, he says, thinking part comes before the emotional part. That means it is the way we interpret that determines whether our emotions will be aroused. If we interpret it one way, the emotion will be aroused. If we interpret it another way, the emotions will not be aroused. If somebody says, Billy, you're so fat, and I interpret it as somebody trying to hurt my feelings, I get upset. Emotions are aroused. But if I were to interpret that, oh, he's such a good friend, he's saying that because he wants me to take care of my health, I feel good. Then emotions are not being aroused, or maybe a positive emotion is aroused. I feel good about it, right? So it is very important to realize it is the way we interpret the thinking. Right? It causes the arousal of the emotions. By changing the thinking, cognitive part, that the emotions can be controlled. And this is something which cognitive psychology is talking about. So cognitive psychotherapy is really to train people how to change the thinking in order to control the emotions, simply put. Now Bhante was pointing out about verse 1 of Dhammapada, one of the most popular common verse that you've ever come across. Often you see the translation says, mind is the forerunner. That's the most common. But the Buddha was not talking about mind as a whole. The Buddha was using the word mano. So what is mano? Mano is our thinking, our cognition, our thinking. Thinking precedes our experiences. It predominates and creates our reality. With unwholesome thoughts, if one were to speak or act, pain follows, just as the carriage follows the drawing animal. And that's really what the Buddha was trying to say. Here, mano is used. So it's our thinking, our cognition. Buddha was not just talking about the mind as a whole. Right? It's not just the mind as a whole, but specifically the way we are thinking, the way we think, and that is cognition, the way we interpret our circumstances. So now let's take a look at cognitive psychology. What Bhante has to say about that.
And during the 1960s, a new kind of psychology came into being. And that is what is called cognitive psychology. And these cognitive psychologists, they began to realize that there was a method of gaining control over emotions. That is the important thing. And what was that method? They pointed out that they also saw this same problem. What is that? The mano and the chitta. Now what Sigmund Freud called the id and the ego. These people call the ego the cognitive part. And the emotional part they called the affective, the cognitive and the affective. And they pointed out that the emotions are excited only according to the way the cognitive part or the mano interprets circumstances. You see, I told you some time back, a few days ago, that we are born with 5 senses, and the 5 senses are seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. But all that goes to the brain, and it is the brain that begins to think, and that is the mano part. And according to the way you think and interpret what is going on there, the emotion is aroused. So the emotion is based on the way you interpret your circumstances. And therefore, if you change the way you interpret your circumstance, the emotion is not aroused.
So it's very important to realize it's the way you interpret. When something happens, just question yourself, how are you interpret those circumstances? So Bhante was saying that emotions are excited only according to the way our cognitive part interprets our circumstances. By changing the way we interpret our circumstances, the emotions are not aroused. So if we were to look at this chain reaction, where is this interpretation going on? That interpretation is there. That part is the interpretation. We normally interpret something that arouses emotions as a perception of threat. You know, when we get emotional, it's because we start to imagine it is something threatening to us. But if we were to change our interpretation and think of it in terms of perception of peace, then we will not be feeling so emotional. When somebody calls me, Billy, you're so fat, and I interpret it as a perception of peace, that he is concerned about my health, then I feel okay. He feels okay. We are still friends. But if I were to interpret it as a perception of threat, he's trying to insult me, he's trying to belittle me, and then I get angry, I shout back at him, and then we end up fighting, and we end up arguing, and we're not friends anymore. See? That interpretation is so important. We can change our interpretation, we can tame our emotions. And that is the most important lesson that we have to learn. That's what the Buddha has been trying to teach us. And finally, I'll finish off with this slide. Remember that when emotions are aroused, pause, relax, and think. Change your interpretation. Pause, allowing the hormones to subside. Relax so that you can speed up the whole thing and calm your mind, compose your mind, and then think about how you can respond peacefully. So by doing that, and this is what the Buddha has been teaching us, when faced with changing vicissitudes of life, changing vicissitudes of life simply means everything around us is happening, changing, affecting us in one way or another. So when faced with changing vicissitudes of life, if emotion can be stilled and remain undisturbed, free from grief, cleansed of defilements, and liberated from fear, this is the most supreme bliss. And this is in the Mangala Sutta. And with that, I end my presentation. Thank you very much.